Program right now, Steve, is, and who knows, it may not be that big a deal as the season plays out. But as we talked last week, Garrett Shrader moving to wide receiver. I mean, what do you think's realistic? I mean, can he catch 20 or 25 balls, or is that way too much to ask for a dude that's just moving to maybe wide receiver 2 weeks before the first game?
I think he can. I think it's going to be, how committed is he to embracing the position? You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where he knows the nuances of the offense. He kind of understands what's expected. It's one thing to have the classroom knowledge and another thing to have the field knowledge. And that's kind of what he's getting up to. I guess he's had, 3 practices now at receiver. Now, people have told me he's been surprisingly good because he is so competitive. He'll get out there and fight for the football, make the contested catch. But, kind of learning the rest of that is going to be, the learning curve. But when you look at Mississippi State's needs at the wide receiver position, I don't know that they have a lot of guys that are more athletic than Garrett Shrader. So I could see him, kind of breaking in slowly. But then once he gets some confidence under his belt, maybe making some plays. But I don't think he's a difference maker, but I do think that he's a guy that can be a solid producer.
So with Shrader and Plumlee, who we mentioned last week, and you watched Plumlee play in high school, and then, of course, last year, who would you think would make the transition smoother? Or is it just a push because they're both, although different athletes, very athletic?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a push. I kind of like Plumlee out of the slot, though. I mean, because he is such a skilled runner. I mean, this is a guy that ran the football a lot in the Rich Rodriguez, run-first scheme. And so he kind of knows what to do out in the open field with the ball in his hands. I think Garrett Shrader is a plus runner. But, I mean, let's be honest, he's not going to beat John Rice Plumlee in a foot race. But, I could see some innovation with Plumlee in the slot. And I think here's the thing that I think makes these moves so interesting. Is now you always constantly have to be aware of the gadget play with Shrader and Plumlee both on the field at the wide receiver position. Anytime you got 2 quarterbacks on the field, you understand that something crazy could happen. And I think Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach are both, wild enough to implement some of that to give those guys an opportunity to throw the football. And that's what happens. You get in the flow of the game and you just kind of get lulled to sleep thinking, okay, it's just another receiver right here. Let me work through my checks, and next thing you know, you bite on a double pass, and it's a touchdown.
I think you make a good point there. The wrinkles, the gadget play with Shrader and Plumlee lined up wherever you line them up could be put some pressure on the defense, and Leach and Kiffin may have some fun with that over the next couple of months. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. All right, what else are you hearing coming out of the weekend? As far as what's going on with the football team in the program?
Yeah, it was an unproductive scrimmage, and it's kind of even again, and that's really what you want. You don't want one unit to dominate the other. But, Leach told us that, there were some shining moments, but also some teachable moments for both sides of the football. And, talking to some people privately kind of away from the microphones, I'm told that Jaden Wiley, the freshman out of D'Iberville, has been one of the more pleasant surprises of camp. I mean, obviously they expected big things for him, long term, but now it appears that he is going to be in a rotation probably with that second group of wide receivers, and that he consistently finds a way to get into the end zone. And this is a personnel group that has really struggled to find guys that could take it the distance. But they say Wiley is a guy that has really acclimated well to the position. I had a chance to watch him play some receiver last year, and certainly in Miss Alabama All-Star practices. But, he's a guy that I think maybe people thought, hey, this guy's maybe a 2 to 3 year project, but he appears to be ahead of schedule. And again, he shined again in the scrimmage on Saturday.
Wow. When was the last time MSU had a receiver make an impact as a true freshman? Chad Bumpus?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Chad Bumpus and Chris Smith both played as true freshmen. That's the thing. You
right.
Go back and look at that group. You had Arcito Clark and Bumpus and Smith. That was kind of that first generation of this new innovation of Mississippi State offense. It's been a long time since we've had true playmakers at receivers, and those guys we hoped would kind of usher in a new level of wide receiver recruiting. But little did we know that Dan Mullen was basically a Big Ten coach just spreading you out to run the football. But it was very successful for a long time, but it just never translated to great wide receiver recruiting. But, you mentioned when's the last time. It's Bumpus, but you've got a good group here with Jaden Wally, and we've heard a lot of Tulu Griffin stuff as well. Rufus Harvey's a guy we're high on, but he's battled a hamstring in practice. But, you got some young guys that this year's a mulligan year, so you might as well get out there and have some fun with it because it doesn't count against your eligibility clock. And so I think you're going to have some teams will be a little more, I guess you would say, eager to get those guys on the field because of the fact that it doesn't hurt you this year and it doesn't hurt you long term. And the only, really the benefits from all that is the fact that all these kids get a chance to get their feet wet without wasting a year of eligibility. And so I think you're going to see a lot of schools, especially Mississippi State, play a lot of these freshmen.
And you're still hearing Will Rogers has wrapped up the number 2 spot behind KJ Costello?
Yeah, that's completely over. And that hadn't been an official announcement on that. But, I mean, it's been kind of trending that way. And I guess, Bo, you and I spoke about it on the phone on your show about 3 weeks ago. Rogers at that time was just kind of beginning to emerge as a guy that was really challenging Garrett Shrader. And when we said it, it was one of those things that people were like, oh, really? What does that mean? Well, now here we are. It means Garrett Shrader's going to receiver and Will Rogers is your number 2 quarterback. And so Jalen Maiden, of course, would be the third guy on the depth chart. But I just kind of get a feeling that if you had an injury and you had to make a move there, you probably move Shrader back.
Yes, absolutely. Or if COVID runs through your QB room, right? Then all of a sudden Garrett Shrader could be start. Okay. Hold on. So Mike Leach, Steve, I watched Gardner Minshew yesterday. I don't know if you've watched any of it or at least saw the highlights, but the young man was 19-20 and played great. This is all tied back. And then I watched Kyler Murray. All this is tied back to Mike Leach. And so, it took a long time for whatever reason, but he's even more of a QB guru today than he was when he was top 5 at Texas Tech, whatever it was, 12 years ago, Steve.
Well, I think he's shown that it wasn't just the fact that he had, Cliff Kingsbury as a quarterback at Texas Tech, and then that led to other recruits coming to Texas Tech. He's done it at Washington State. We've had this conversation before. Washington State, the lowest budget in the Power 5, the most remote outpost in the Pac-12. So you're getting the leftovers. That's just the reality of it. You're getting the leftovers. And so now Mike Leach has taken a lot of guys that nobody else really wanted, some walk-ons from junior college, guys that didn't have any other Power 5 offers, and he's led the nation in passing. And so what can he do now that he has maybe some more coveted quarterbacks? And that's one of those things you kind of ask yourself, if they don't have this chip on their shoulder, if they don't have as much to prove, will they work as hard? Will they embrace what Mike Leach is asking? Now, I think Mike Leach is real big on the accountability piece, but it will be different. It will be interesting to see what happens when Leach gets these more polished high school quarterbacks in his program. And I think we'll see, have a pretty good idea of that once we see what KJ Costello does this year.
This is MSU people are trying to wrap their brain around having a quarterback that's this young, hyped like Will Rogers has been hyped the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And one of the things that about Will Rogers, too, is, Will Rogers grew up watching game film with his dad. So he is a student of the game and mentally is so far ahead of what a lot of other guys his age would be. And so I think when you begin to look at it from the cerebral point of view, Will understands coverages, he understands checks, so he's not having to learn those things on the fly. So when Mike Leach throws some stuff at him, he's able to absorb that, and I think that's one of the reasons that he has maybe elevated his game so quickly.
Steve Robertson, genespage.com, 247 Sports on the Out of Bounds show and the Parish Brewing guest line. Marks from Atlanta. He's the backup running back behind Colin Hill?
It's interesting you asked that question. I think, right now, if you had to go play, he's the number 2. But, I had a conversation yesterday about this, this young nucleus of running backs, because when you say Mississippi State running back, immediately you think of Colin Hill, and rightfully so. But with this year not counting against everybody's eligibility, you've got Lee Weatherspoon, who is back, who essentially gets the redshirt year this year. He'll get to play, but it won't count against him. But I continue to hear so many great things about Dylan Johnson and so many things about Jaquavius Marks, so much to the point that I'm told that initially this was supposed to be a 2 running back class from Mississippi State. Now I'm hearing it's probably not going to be a 2 running back class unless it's just a real difference maker falls in their laps. And so you've got this young nucleus of guys that will kind of grow together. And so now the needs at running back aren't nearly as emergent. And you got Kareem Walker as a senior. Should you elect to bring him back, obviously he could come back and be a good stopgap guy while these young guys develop. But the running back room appears to be in really good shape. And I don't know that we were expecting that, maybe a year ago. But where we are now, you look at it and say, okay, well, the depth chart is really, really young. We can give these guys some time to develop, and we can be real selective on the recruiting trail when it comes to running backs. That's a good position to be in.
Wow. Okay. So you're thinking there could be a lot of well, depending on how many reps are left, but a good bit of rotation once they get past Colin Hill on the depth chart?
I think so. And let's be honest, they're going to ride Colin Hill for all they can get out
Sure.
of him. And he's your best player. But, I think what happens later in ball games is when you're trying to save a little wear and tear on number 8, you put those young guys in there and you kind of balance the carries out and balance the touches out, see what they can do, but also, too, kind of save some wear and tear on Colin.
Okay, so tell me more. Dylan Johnson out of St. Joe, Greenville. Tell me more about him, Steve.
I absolutely love him. I thought last year he was one of the best athletes in the state, and there's a lot of misinformation about his recruitment early on. He grew up a Mississippi State fan, said openly that he cheered for Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl his entire life, and he wanted to be a Bulldog. But he's one of those guys, too. A lot of people said, okay, well, we can move him to safety. We move him to linebacker. This is the guy you want the ball in his hands. He's a guy that's very dynamic. He won state championships in basketball. He was a guy that won state championships in football. Kind of like Jonathan Banks in the respect that he's just kind of good at everything, just an all-around athlete. And so I think those guys are better suited for offense, especially when you've got an offensive-minded coach like Mike Leach. He will know how to use him, but because Dylan's the guy that had such good dexterity, he's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's not a one-trick pony. And I think when you begin to look at this thing with he and Marks kind of growing together, I think it really gives Mississippi State some really serious options for the running game moving forward.
And Dylan Johnson out of Greenville, Mississippi, according to what you're hearing, is not allowing Marks to just run away with it behind Colin Hill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, those guys are competing. And that's the thing you look at, too, is your competition makes them all better. But, Marks is not head and shoulders better than Dylan Johnson at this point. I think he's probably maybe a little more polished due to the level of competition he faced in high school. But both of those guys are going to be big-time players at Mississippi State.
And what are you hearing on Malik Heath?
Nobody's willing to say anything officially, and I think we probably won't know until game day. But I expect him to sit the LSU game, but he's having a good camp. I mean, every time I turn around, somebody's telling me this guy's exactly what we expected him to be, very competitive. And I think he makes the room better because he is so competitive and he is so vocal. I think he sees the cornerbacks as his enemies. He gets out there. It's not mean-spirited, but he wants to beat them and embarrass them and then let them know about it every single play. Some of that is just kind of his personality. And I think you need a guy like that in the room because he brings the best out of other people. And I do think that he is a guy that can kind of elevate that receiving core this year, not just with his play, but with his leadership.
What are you hearing on the class, the freshman class as a whole? Is the staff impressed with what Moorhead and them signed last December? And really they were the ones that, handed Leach off some more good players in February, if you will.
Yeah, and Coach Leach kind of gave them tip of the cap back on signing day and talked about what a great crop of kids they had. But I think they've actually exceeded expectations. I don't think anybody expected a lot of these, especially the freshman receivers, to kind of compete the way that they have. And, defensively to be a little different. I think Armandus Cooley is a guy that will see some time on the interior defensive line. They got some junior college guys they're really excited about, obviously, with Jordan Davis. He'll be a starter from day one. And, those young defensive backs. I mean, Janari Dean's a guy they love. Emmanuel Forbes is a guy that may end up starting against LSU. He and Asai Spurge are battling out to get that cornerback spot opposite Martin Emerson. So the fact that they're not having to put some of these guys there just basically out of need, but some of these guys aren't giving them much of a choice because they're the better players.
Why do you think Armandus Cooley out of Wayne County wasn't more – is he a late bloomer? Is that why he wasn't more highly rated, highly coveted?
You know, he had several offers, but I think it's one of those guys deep down. I think everybody knew he wanted to stay closer to home. Ole Miss didn't really get involved with him until late, and by that time his mind was pretty much made up. But I went and watched him play, and they lined him up at defensive end, and he's not a defensive end, but his motor was incredible. Even though that he was a guy that couldn't always get to the quarterback, he impacted the play. He got his hands up, flushed the guy in the pocket. That'll serve him well on the interior because of the fact he has elite quickness. He is a real quick twitch guy. I think that he is a future star at Mississippi State. And we talk so much about these defensive linemen and what they can do and what Mississippi State's legacy has been in recent years. I think Armandus Cooley is in that same vein. I think that he is a guy that'll be a pro football player someday.
Damn. Steve Robertson, genespage.com on the Out of Bounds show. So, Steve, this, we've been on the air for 18 recruiting classes, and I can't tell you how many guys ranked in the top 5 have not panned out from our top 6, top 7 in this state. Now, a bunch of them have too, like Jeffrey Simmons and A.J. Brown. But so what you're telling me, there could be an enormous amount of value in this class for Leach when you're talking about Dylan Johnson, not top 5 player, Janari Dean, not a top 5 player, Jaden Wally, not a top 10 player, top 15 player, and then all the way down to Will Rogers, not a top 15 player, and Armandus Cooley, not a top 20 player.
And then you add Grant Jackson in there, who they absolutely love. I think they took 2 offensive linemen last year. I think Calvin McMillian's still a work in progress and developmental guy. But, Grant Jackson, hear Mason Miller talk, he says, Grant Jackson will take a defensive end and just throw him. And he tells them, hey, it's not a bale of hay. I don't want you just chunking guys out here. We want to work our technique. But he has the raw materials to be a very good player long term. And he's a guy that I think eventually will be a multi-year starter at tackle for Mississippi State. He's a long, physical country kid that just has come by it honestly. And he's another guy that wasn't highly recruited or highly coveted. He had some offers early on, but, when he got ready to pick, Mississippi State was probably the best available offer. But, yeah, there's some real value in the class. And I think a lot of it's because it was kind of a weird year. We had such a great year in 2019. I think a lot of people thought there's no way Mississippi's that good back-to-back years. And I think we're going to have a lot of busts in 2019, and I think there's going to be some guys from 2020 that surprise people and say, you know what, man, these recruiting rankings maybe aren't what people say they are.
That, every now and then this happens in Starkville and Oxford, where you get all this value between like 10 and 25, and one of the teams hit on a bunch of dudes. And if that's the case with Janari Dean, Dylan Johnson, Will Rogers, Jaden Wally, Armandus Cooley, and Grant Jackson, none who people were, salivating over. That's going to be fascinating to see how that all shakes out in Starkville. Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, genespage.com, 247 Sports on the Parish Brewing guest line. Steve, I've got about a minute here. Tell me what you're hearing on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, I think the first-team defense is going to be good. And I think the issue, and we discussed it before, is just going to be depth. I think there's probably 5 game-ready defensive linemen. The linebacker room is very athletic but lacks experience, and much can be said for the secondary. You feel really good about Marcus Murphy. You feel really good about Martin Emerson. Now it's finding the pieces to kind of put around them. And so you're going to have some young guys out there, and there is going to be some growing pains. Bulldog fans need to be expected that that's going to happen. You've got some great athletes. You've got some guys that are going to be great players long term, but they're going to take some lumps this year. Hopefully that state will be able to outscore them, but they're going to have some issues, especially with teams that think that can line up, protect, and throw the football. That secondary, very, very talented, but very, very green. And I think that's really the issue you look at long term when people can spread you out and isolate your worst DB against their 4th or 5th best receiver. That's going to be matchups that are not advantageous to Mississippi State.
And we'll segue real quick. Jonathan Abram. This guy is an absolute dude. Now, you got to be around him every day for 2 years. What was it like to cover him as far as his personality and kind of charisma and locker room presence?
He was one of those guys who did not accept the natural order of things. A lot of people think, okay, well, we're from Mississippi. He didn't believe that was a deficit to him. He believed that, I'm from Mississippi. Look at our legacy. Look at our heritage. And he never thought Alabama or LSU or Auburn were better than him or Mississippi State. And he played that way. He played with his hair on fire, as they say. And, I've known him for a long time. I remember the very first time I got his highlight film, and he didn't have a single offer and wasn't even getting letters from schools. And now look at him now at 13 tackles, probably your NFL Defensive Player of the Week. I mean, it's incredible.
What a player, man. And what he did in year 2 at MSU, and then what he did with the Raiders yesterday, that dude is incredible. And he wasn't a top 10 or top 15 player, I don't think, and Georgia still signed him. Isn't that right, Steve?
The 5th rated safety in the state of Mississippi that year.
What?
Yeah, behind Jamal Peters, Mark McLaurin, Jarvis Wilson, and Armani Lenton. He ranked 5th in the state that year as a safety.
Goodness.
Now they're all watching him play.
He can ball, flat out ball. All right, Steve, thanks for your time. We'll catch up again later in the week. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, genespage.com. For our listeners, Jonathan Abram with the Las Vegas Raiders, and I'm still going to call them Oakland, but Jonathan Abram with the Las Vegas Raiders had a monster day, Blake Scott. That's one of your favorite players, too.
13 tackles, led the team. Next closest person had, I think, 6 or 5.
He almost sent someone to the hospital on special teams.
Yeah, he's
on
a freak.
Play yesterday.
Freak.
I was like, "Ooh, who was that?" And I went, "That's Jonathan Abram." He just about, it was like a body blow. Holy smokes! He's the Tasmanian devil out there. Just, it is. It's like you shot him out of a cannon every time. Now, hopefully, he can stay healthy, but. Man, what a player. And the fact that he ends up at Mississippi State after going to Georgia, that was, well, it wasn't luck, but it was lined up. All right, live in the Bank Plus studio, the Out of Bounds Show, brought to you by RPT and Rick's Pro Truck, #1 Jeep truck accessory stores in Mississippi. RicksProTruck.com, new retail location, Gluckstadt, Madison County. Spray and bed liners and lift kits, all at RPT and Rick's Pro Truck. That's right. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. Welcome in. Good morning on a Monday. Actually recapping some live football games. I love it.